Middle-earth has seen more than its fair share of conflicts throughout its history, some much more violent and destructive than others. Some involved countless, gruesome deaths which soaked the ground in blood, while others resulted in the literal shaping of the geography of Arda. What were these struggles, and how did they impact their participants and the world as a whole? Let's delve into the 5 most brutal battles of Middle-earth. Number 1. The Siege of Eregion. The first battle on our list takes place in the year 1697 of the Second Age. Eregion, a green and beautiful land famous for its holly trees, was populated by Noldoran elves, situated close to the west gate of Khazad-dûm. At the time, it was ruled by Celebrimbor, a kind leader and master smith. He loved all aspects of the craft of metalworking, and through him, a great friendship and exchange of technical skills and crafting secrets were shared between Eregion and Khazad-dûm. Under Celebrimbor's selfless leadership, Eregion, flourishing, rare among elven kingdoms, in that it had peaceful relations with the dwarves. However, this prosperity was soon marred by the arrival of a mysterious stranger who called himself Annatar, claiming to be an emissary of the Valar themselves, come to Eregion to teach its great smiths the powerful art of ring-making. Other elven smiths were immediately enticed by the tantalizing promise of this knowledge, but Celebrimbor was suspicious and refused to work with Annatar, instead forging his own rings. And these suspicions were soon justified, as the mysterious emissary revealed himself to be Sauron, former lieutenant of Morgoth. He had created, in secret, another ring, the One Ring, bound to all the others through a spell, allowing him to command and control the wearers of these rings with ease. Once Sauron's identity became known, the elves of Eregion defied him by withholding the rings. 7 of the rings were sent to Khazad-dûm, trusting them in the hands of Durin III, and the 3 rings forged by Celebrimbor himself were given to Gil-galad in Lindon, Galadriel in Lorien, and Círdan, the shipwright, in the Grey Havens, who kept them far away from Eregion and Sauron's reach. In response to this, Sauron's retaliation was devastating. Elrond, at the head of a small army sent by Gil-galad, marched as fast as he could to come to Celebrimbor's aid, making haste across the mountains and through the countryside. But his help was too little, too late. Orcs had swarmed Eregion, setting fire to its beloved holly trees, tearing down its towers and forges, and reducing them to dust and rubble. The elves of Eregion had fought valiantly, but their broken bodies lay strewn on the blood-soaked soil, overwhelmed by the Morgul host. The body of Celebrimbor himself hung upon a pole in the midst of the ruins, pierced 100 times over by orcish arrows. In his last hours, they had tortured him mercilessly, forcing him to disclose the location of the rings he had sent to the dwarves. He refused, however, to reveal the hiding place of the 3 elven rings, and for that, he had been murdered. The grief of this loss was immense, but Elrond and his men had no time to feel it. They were attacked shortly after they arrived. Their army was too small to stand alone. Eregion might have become their burial ground as well, had it not been for dwarves of Khazad-dûm, who attacked Sauron's army from behind and gave the elves the opportunity to flee north, to the Misty Mountains. The Siege of Eregion was a crushing tragedy for the elves of Middle-earth. It marked the beginning of the War of the Elves and Sauron, a brutal conflict that, although successful in expelling Sauron from the region of Eriador, cost them so much valuable life and beautiful land, and created in the elven people a deep hatred for Sauron and his orcs and an intense desire to bring about his destruction. And this deep, personal enmity fueled them in the next battle on the list, the Battle of Dagorlad, which took place during the War of the Last Alliance. Number 2. The Battle of Dagorlad. The Last Alliance of Elves and Men was the largest military union of the free peoples of Middle-earth, a conjoined army commanded by the greatest kings and lords of the time. The elves were led by the High King Gil-galad of the Noldor, King Horrifying of the Woodland Realm, and King Amdur of Lothlorien, and joined forces with Elendil's armies from Arnor and Gondor. Even dwarves from Khazad-dûm, sent by Durin IV to fight alongside the Last Alliance, offered the might of their army to the cause. Although these forces were united in their desire to vanquish Sauron and his host in Mordor, tensions arose that threatened the success of their military campaign. In the year 3434 of the Second Age, the armies of Gil-galad and Elendil marched to the desolate, treeless plains of Dagorlad, just outside of Mordor. Orcs, trolls, and other fearsome creatures were assembled against them, prepared to defend the Black Gate and prevent the Free People's advancement into Sauron's territory. But before the battle began, whilst both armies were still lying in wait, there was already tension brewing. The Sylvan Elves, ruled by Horrifying and Amdir, were reclusive forest dwellers whose culture was considered crude and rustic in comparison to that of other elven peoples. Their relationship with the Noldor was somewhat antagonistic. Cultural differences meant that the Noldor held themselves in higher esteem than the Wood Elves. They also disliked the reclusive nature of their kin, resenting them for their reluctance to participate in struggles against the forces of evil. The Sylvan Elves, on the other hand, generally saw the Noldor as arrogant, holding no small amount of resentment in return. Thus, the armies of Horrifying and Amdir chafed under Gil-galad's command, hating that they had to follow the orders of the king of the Noldor. Finally, they could stand it no longer. The Sylvan Elves were overcome with a spirit of defiance that compelled them to charge ahead of the rest of the army, rushing onto the barren, dusty plains before Gil-galad had given the order. Despite the passionate bravery of their attack on the enemy, they were woefully outnumbered and ill-equipped. Their troops were slaughtered mercilessly, and the kings Horrifying and Amdir perished along with them. Gil-galad and Elendil's men ran to their aid, but the enemy army had already gained the upper hand, pushing them back and cutting down scores of soldiers as they advanced. It took months of fighting for the last alliance of elves and men to push Sauron's army back towards the Black Gate. Their victory wiped out a heavy portion of Sauron's forces, changing the course of the war and allowing them to advance past the Black Gate into Udun. But the cost of that victory, all those needless deaths, weighed heavy on their hearts. So much Sylvan blood had been shed, thousands upon thousands of lifeless bodies who had died for nothing but their own pride. Their corpses littered the marshes bordering Dagorlad, sinking deeper and deeper into the murk and mire as time went on. This place became known as the Dead Marshes, where the preserved bodies of the Sylvan Elves laid below the surface of the stagnant waters for centuries, a haunting reminder of their bitter and unnecessary deaths. Number 3. The First War. For the third battle on this list, we travel back to the days before days. Arda had just been born, formed of the music of the Ainur, a great harmony of the thoughts and ideas of those mighty beings, themselves creations of Eru Ilúvatar's eternal omnipotence. Once Arda was created from the shapeless void, the Valar, greatest among the Ainur, descended into it to prepare this new world for the coming of elves and men. But Melkor, the strongest and most knowledgeable of the Valar, rebelled against Ilúvatar and his fellow Ainur. He claimed Arda as his rightful dominion, desiring to spread discord and confusion on the infant earth they had formed. The other Valar refused to honor his claim, and thus ensued the struggle known as the First War. The First War was not a battle of bloodshed and death, but of the creation and destruction of the very substance of the world. Mountains were crushed back into dust as soon as they were raised. Islands drowned moments after their births. The trees and grass which sprouted from the soil shriveled up in an instant, and their dried remains were carried away in the fierce winds. Wherever the Valar sculpted the earth in accordance to the great music, giving life to the lands and seas, Melkor was there to undo their creations. He did this for centuries, foiling their every plan to bring order to Arda, unleashing chaos in every crevice of the world, until at last, Tulkas the Strong, champion of the Valar, came down from the heavens and drove him away. At last, the Valar were able to calm to earth and make it suitable for its future inhabitants. But Melkor had ruined Ilúvatar's vision of Arda's perfection. The endless years of conflict had brutally ravaged the planet, and despite the Valar's efforts to heal it, Arda was left forever marred. The Valar brought peace and beauty to the world, but evil had been introduced to it. Remnants of Melkor's power still lurked in dark places, waiting for his return to reawaken. Number 4. The Battle of Unnumbered Tears. Also called Nirne Eth Arnoediad, this was the 5th major battle of the War of the Jewels, which took place towards the end of the First Age. The war began when Morgoth stole the Silmarils, desiring their power for himself. These jewels, crafted from the pure light of the 2 trees of Valinor, were the prized possession of their creator, the Noldoran elf Fëanor. After their theft, the Noldor declared war on Morgoth, beginning a centuries-long struggle to reclaim the sacred gems, a struggle which inflicted such a devastating toll on the peoples who fought in it, that among the casualties there was little room for joy in their victory. One of the worst battles of this grisly war was the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, a decisive victory for Morgoth's armies which utterly broke the union of Maethros, eldest son of Feanor. His alliance consisted of Noldoran elves, the Edain, the dwarves of Belegost, and other peoples of Beleriand, the vast northwestern region of Middle-earth. At this point in the war, most of that area had fallen under the siege of Morgoth's host, but Maethros had hoped that with a united army of Morgoth's foes, he could drive the enemy out of Beleriand and win a victory for the forces of good. They were greatly outnumbered and overpowered. The hosts of evil seemed endless, constantly pouring onto the battlefield and slaughtering Maethros' troops. Many important figures were slain or captured, and rather than taking back Beleriand, the Noldor lost control of it entirely. The land was overrun by orcs and trolls, and Morgoth's triumph gave him full dominance over the region. The casualties were too numerous to comprehend. The slain soldiers of the Union of Maethros were so many that when the orcs gathered their bodies and piled them in the midst of the ravaged landscape of Beleriand, the mound could be seen from miles away and became known as the Hill of the Slain. With the sons of Feanor scattered and most of the Union of Maethros dead, the ability of elves and men to wage war against Morgoth and achieve victory on their own was unthinkable. But in the final battle of the War of the Jewels, the Valar themselves came to fight alongside them and expel Morgoth. Number 5. The War of Wrath. This conflict began when the Valar finally intervened in the war that the Noldor had begun against Morgoth. The Valar had pledged to let the elves suffer the consequences of their foolish decision to declare war against the Dark Lord, and for years had been watching their efforts fail and their kingdoms fall. But after the catastrophic loss in the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, the half-elf mariner Arendil sailed to Valinor and begged the Valar to pardon the people of Middle-earth and aid them in their time of dire need. His plea was so plaintive, so poignant, that Manwë, king of the Valar, was moved to break his pledge to come to their rescue, and so led the beings of Valinor to war. It was the largest battle ever to occur in Arda. The hosts of Valinor and Middle-earth, once combined, were able to utterly destroy the volcanic mountains of Thangorodrim, as well as Angband, the underground fortress beneath them. Morgoth's armies of orcs and Balrogs were killed in droves, and the dragons bred in Angband were slain by the great eagles of Manwë. And at last, at the end of the battle, Morgoth himself was captured by the Valar, who beheaded him and threw his body and spirit through the door of night into the timeless void, imprisoned for eternity outside of creation. Although Morgoth's reign of terror had finally come to an end, the loss of life was massive, and Middle-earth's geography was permanently altered. Beleriand, which bore the brunt of the conflict, was utterly shattered, and the broken earth sank into the ocean, lost forever beneath the frothing waves of the Belegire Sea. Morgoth had been cast out forever, but the losses that Middle-earth experienced as a result of this brutal conflict made the victory bittersweet. Let us know in the comments, which of Middle-earth's battles do you think is the most brutal? Be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell for more epic stories from the world of J.R.R. Tolkien.